Now, if you're an avid listener to the afternoons, you'll know by now I really am so passionate about highlighting and showcasing amazing Londoners who are quietly transforming lives right across our city. And my next guest is doing just that. She's the CEO of EqualReach. So this is a social enterprise, basically bridging the gap between teams of technical skilled refugees and work opportunities that they essentially deserve. I'm joined in the studio with award-winning social entrepreneur Giselle Gonzalez. It's great to have you on Radio London.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So 2.5 years ago, you walked away, you said goodbye, you sent HR an email, I'm out of here, from your senior role at a Fortune 50 company to start EqualReach. I guess really what I'd like to know was, what was that moment that made you say, I have to build this myself?
It was a moment when I realized this had been about 10 years in the making.
Okay.
And I thought, if I don't leave now and build this, I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life.
Wow. That's something, they often say, it's never the trying that people regret. It's the not trying that people regret. So was this an idea that had been bubbling in your mind for nearly a decade? And do you remember where that first seed was put into your mind around the whole concept of EqualReach?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, during that mass migration of Syrian refugees, this is 2015, 2016, into to Germany when they had opened up their borders, I went as a freelancer myself, documenting the realities of displacement. That was my first interaction ever, talking with refugees in person. I had only just seen, on the media what the refugee experience was like. And I traveled from Greece to Germany and saw firsthand the stories and the trials of what people had to face. I snuck into a refugee camp in Serbia, for example, and sat with someone who had just lost their family, and sat with another person who showed me the biscuits that their 4-year-old had only been given for 3 days. I asked them about their story and heard, I was a designer in Syria. And I thought, okay, that's nice. But he said, no. I don't think you realize I was like a well-known fashion designer. And he pointed to someone random in this tent of people and said, see that jacket? I designed it.
Oh my gosh.
And I think that reframed for me, realizing the skills and the stories that are hidden behind this label of refugee that we so often overlook. And that led into, when I went back to grad school at University of Edinburgh, I studied this emergence of digital work among refugees, then went into tech, and I found myself managing the very types of projects that refugees struggle to access, and realized that there was a massive both social and also business opportunity to basically put two sides of the same coin together. You've got this incredible and growing, unfortunately, 130 plus million forcibly displaced people around the world who have skills, desires, aspirations. They want to contribute to the economies where they're in their host communities. And yet they often really struggle to be seen for their skills and find opportunities. And then on the other side, you've got businesses that need the skills that this population of people have. And so it really became, how do I put those two together?
It's quite something, the way in which you've humanized essentially the story, the journey of these refugees and the work that they did before, for whatever reason, victims of circumstance, if you will, that they're in this position where they're displaced from their homeland, from their jobs, from their creativity, to then say, okay, how do we help? That's oftentimes the question, isn't it? Some people feel I can help displaced people and communities by giving money, and that's wonderful. Others will volunteer, but you're trying to do something a little bit more tangible. What would you say, though? And I suspect in the last 2.5 years with EqualReach, you will have received some of this negativity. We are living in very heightened political times. Some of that conversation that you've just outlined now is exactly why some of our listeners, not all, but some of our listeners will be saying, this is why we don't need any more people coming to this country, because we don't have enough jobs. And here you are giving jobs to, sure, deserved refugees. However, what about people that are living here, working here, have got graduations, have got degrees, and they're not getting work? Firstly, have you received that type of response? And secondly, what would you say to it?
I think that response is natural. And you even see this in the UK and even beyond. Whenever there's a community that's struggling economically themselves, like jobs are, in short supply, or there's a struggle for people to find meaningful work in their own country, there's this very easy narrative that can build up around othering of, well, let's avoid bringing them in and let's keep them away. And a lot of my research looked at how do we create economic opportunity for both? So it's not us versus them, but how do we raise all boats together? And so a lot of what we do is we work with refugee-led and supporting organizations that are working both with refugee communities and the local host communities in 15 different countries now, where we make sure that there are economic incentives so that both communities benefit economically, socially, and there's that integration without us versus them.
Can you give us some London examples of that, please?
Yeah. So, for example, there is a cohort that we started about a year ago in London with a mix of refugees from around the world. I'll give you three examples of three Ukrainians. So they had come to London and we embedded them within a local London team. One was a graphic designer. Her name is Irina. She had done graphic design for years, came to the UK with her son with nothing but a carry-on suitcase, and didn't realize that she'd end up staying for the last couple of years since the war has not gone on for about 4 years. And she started doing graphic design work for local businesses here. And not only did that give her economic opportunity, but it also has been supporting local businesses. So one company, a small a UK-based business, saw a 400% year-on-year growth in their sales because of the design and marketing work that she was able to bring to them. So that's one example of all boats rising together. Another story, there's a man named Alex. He was a CTO of a technology company in Ukraine, came with years of experience, arrived in the UK and was really struggling to be seen for his skills. He didn't have the network, and so people saw this gap on his resume, not realizing that it had been because he had been fleeing a war zone. And when he was here, he realized, Ukrainian farmers back in his hometown were really struggling in the winter to provide food for the table. And so he's super entrepreneurial, like many refugees are, and said, okay, I'm in the UK, I'll make a business here. And I see locally there's a lot of interest in honey. And so he started buying honey from those farmers, created a business, and now you can find him every once in a while in the Elephant and Castle market selling that honey. And on the side, we were able to connect him with the local team where he brought all that experience, and he's supporting local businesses, again, as an account manager to help them in the e-commerce space.
It's really wonderful. And thank you, firstly, for highlighting just those two examples, because I'm sure you'll appreciate it is divisive when you have this conversation. And, of course, some of our listeners will say it shouldn't be. However, there is such a political climate. There is a lot of animosity, it must be said. We can see it in the headlines regularly, just around the conversation of refugees, settlement of refugees, and support around them. How do you kind of ensure then, because part of this is we know that many refugees are funneled into low-paid work, despite, as you've highlighted there, having strong professional backgrounds. What are perhaps some of those big misconceptions you're fighting against? And I guess, how do you then, speak to companies to say, hold on, this person has a skill set that is missing and will be beneficial for you?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to first looking at refugees in light of their skills and what they can contribute. That's just a reframing, because most of us think of a refugee and they think of someone that is sitting in a refugee camp without a phone, without access to a laptop. They're thinking of them more in an aid perspective, kind of as a beneficiary, versus someone who has autonomy, skills, desires. And so I think just humanizing an individual beyond the label is the first step. And then I think the next step is looking at economically what they can contribute. And countries miss out if they're not providing opportunities for, if someone has come into the country legally. I'll take Poland, for example. In 2024, with the mass exodus of Ukrainian refugees, there was a report that went out from Deloitte and UNHCR that looked at the GDP impact. And they saw that Poland saw a 2.7% increase increase in their national GDP because refugees were contributing and able to work in the workforce.
Okay.
So for contrast, I think in that same year, the UK's whole defense budget was 2.3%. And so countries, there is a potential to miss out just from a purely kind of selfish, way of
it's good for the economy.
Yeah, exactly. Taxable income.
Basically, what you're trying to say is good for the economy.
Yeah.
It's win-win for everyone.
And I will say it is so complex, and I hear that, but the UK has one of the strictest right to work laws. So even the work that we do, actually the minority of refugees that we work with are here in the UK because so few even have that right to work. And so that's where we do a lot of work in the MENA region in East Africa.
Can I just ask you how you, on a personal level, having gone through this whole journey, you said earlier on, 10 years ago, you decided clearly this is a passion for you to document, to get an understanding of the background of refugees. That's led you on to then creating EqualReach. And really bridging that gap, as you've already talked about, of skilled refugees in the workplace. But how do you stay grounded whilst doing it? This does sound very heavy. It's very emotionally heavy, this type of work. How do you stay grounded in all of this, Giselle?
I think I sit on the side of hope. And what I've seen is that I think like anything, if you get so overwhelmed by the mess and the complexity in the world, and my generation, especially and younger, like we see everything at our fingertips when we're scrolling through within a 30-second window of what's happening in the world. But if we just let that simmer and we don't act, that's when hope is lost. And I am so thankful with my team and the friends of EqualReach who have come, and even our customers, where we're uniting people who want to be pesky do-gooders. And I was just speaking with a friend, and he gave me this definition that I love about what a pesky do-gooder is. And it's a pesky do-gooder is someone who sees cracks in the system and doesn't just complain, they get to work. They understand how society actually operates, not just how it's supposed to, and they know how to work with and around the norms to drive meaningful change. They don't ask for permission to care, they just do. They're persistent, principled, sometimes disruptive, always purpose-driven, and always on the side of people and progress.
Maybe we can all be pesky do-gooders, hey? That's kind of what comes across to me.
That's the hope.
It's fantastic, the work that you are doing. And if anyone's tuned into Radio London, maybe there's an organisation that is thinking, gosh, that there could be some synergy here between what they're looking for employees and the support that you can provide for those prospective employees. It's equalreach.io for more details. So head to that website, equalreach.io. Giselle, what a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for sharing your story. Right, time now is 2:31. Let's get up to on the roads. Traffic and travel with Billy Reeves.
Thanks very much, Shay.